Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a world of fire, thick with smoke, and the pounding echo of hammers, the birthplace of one of the most important figures of the Middle Ages, the blacksmith. You've probably seen them in movies, slowly striking glowing iron as sparks fly beautifully like fireworks. But trust me, in reality this craft was nothing romantic. It was grueling, scorching, blistering work, where sweat mixed with ash every single day. So, before you settle in, make sure to hit like and subscribe, of course. Only if you truly feel what I bring here is worth it. And don't forget to drop a comment below to let me know where are you watching from and what time is it where you are. I always find it amazing to see people from all over the world gathering here. Now, dim the lights, let the fan hum softly, and join me on tonight's journey. You were not born with a crown, no land, no power, only a forge thick with smoke and the endless clang of hammers day after day. That was the only inheritance your father left. A smoke-stained hut, a cracked anvil, and the stench of burning iron seared so deep it clung to your hair, your clothes, your skin. Before you even knew the joy of throwing stones or chasing chickens with the village kids, you were already pulled into that suffocating space. Your childhood? Others had it. For you, childhood was a luxury. At 6, instead of hearing fairy tales, you were learning to grip tongs, pump the bellows, feed the fire until it roared. Your small hands, meant to hold sticks or grass, swelled red from hot iron and blackened with soot. Your day began not with a rooster's crow, but with your father's thunderous hammer, forcing you up, dragging your little legs into the forge, into the endless chorus of the blacksmith's life. There was no such thing as days off. Sunday? The forge didn't know the Sabbath. Festivals? If villagers needed plows repaired or knives sharpened, you and your father worked until your hands trembled and your eyes blurred with smoke. Every empty moment was filled with orders shouted at you. The fire's weak, pump harder. Or, where's the water? Quick, to the trough. And you ran, always running, a shadow in that grinding cycle. While children your age played in the fields under the sun, you sat by the coals, learning to read colours of fire. Which red meant the iron was soft enough to shape, which yellow was brittle, which white would explode if mishandled. Your game was guessing the heat by daring your hand near before pulling back from a burn. Your reward was blisters, scars, and your father's hoarse scolding. Too slow, faster. Every morning, you hauled buckets of water heavier than your own body. Your thin arms hardened, your small shoulders bent, your young spine already burdened. While the neighbour's dog lay lazy in the sun, you strained at the bellows, pumping gusts to keep the blaze alive. Heat scorched your face, smoke stung your eyes, thirst burned your throat, but stopping was forbidden. The forge allowed no rest, it demanded endlessly, like a beast fed by your sweat and strength. Your meals? A crust of dry bread, sometimes dipped in salt, chewed fast beside the furnace while ash seasoned every bite. You ate while pumping the bellows, ate while hearing your father's hammer beat down. No proper table, no gleaming cutlery, only shadow, soot, and the constant ringing of iron in your head. Sometimes, in rare moments of sitting still, you caught the laughter of children outside. They skipped stones in puddles, shouted in glee at catching a sparrow. Your chest tightened. You longed for just one carefree moment. But reality snapped back with your father's bark. "On your feet! The coals are dying!" And you rose again, bare feet pressing down on shards of iron, sharp pain cutting in, but silence was your only answer. The only thing you learned here wasn't letters or hymns, it was endurance. How to withstand heat, smoke, exhaustion, pain. Patience and toughness became your curriculum, taught by yelling, by lashes, by endless labour. You began to understand. In this world of fire and steel, weakness had no place. A single crack, a single misstrike, could cost you scars or worse, fury raining down. You no longer smelled wildflowers in spring. The only scent you knew was red-hot iron, scorched skin, smoke woven into your hair. You no longer heard music or laughter. The only rhythm was the hiss of quenching, the whoosh of bellows, the hammer pounding like war drums. Slowly, your mind adjusted to that merciless rhythm. Time passed, and your body warped out of step with others your age. While 12-year-olds grew tall, their faces sun-warmed and bright, your hands grew rough, your back stooped like an old man's. Fingernails split, fingertips hardened like stone. Skin blackened by smoke peeled from burns. Your face, always smeared with soot, no longer carried a child's softness. People looked and whispered, "That's not a boy, it's a blacksmith's apprentice." Your days repeated endlessly. Dawn hauling water, fanning flames, gripping tongs. Noon sweating beside the fire, dripping as though bathed in rain. Dusk cleaning, stacking coal, scrubbing tools. Even at night, your hands trembled, smoke burned your lungs, your chest coughed like an old man dying. When you collapsed onto damp straw, your head still rang clang, 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 until you dreamed of hammering again. Even in sleep, you couldn't escape the forge. No one asked if you wanted to be a smith. There was no choice. Fate was sealed. Your father had once endured your grandfather's shouting. Now it was your turn, and one day it would be your child's. The forge was a chain, binding one life to the next. In your world, life meant labor. You breathed to work, ate to work, slept to work. Every drop of sweat, every blister, every burn was carved into you like writing, reminding you were not a child, but a living tool for the eternal fire. Sometimes a farmer came by with a broken plough. He grumbled, impatient, never sparing you a glance. To him, you were just the shadow behind your father, fetching, stoking flames. But you knew without you, the fire would die, the plough would stay broken, the harvest would fail. You were invisible, yet necessary. That was the bitter truth. You lived to labor, but your life was unseen. You learned to swallow tears. Complaints weren't allowed. Tired didn't exist in the forge's vocabulary. Instead, you learned to lift your head when your hands burned, to grit your teeth when your back twisted in pain. You told yourself, "This is fate. This is life." And you carried on, turning like a wheel that never stopped. Years later, you realized a harsh truth. The forge didn't just temper steel, it tempered you. It heated you in fire, hammered you under blows, bent you into its desired shape, twisted, scarred, but unbreakably tough. And no matter how much you resented it, you couldn't deny that brutal labor had forged you into a blacksmith. Not a child, not a dreamer, but part of the forge, part of the iron, part of the ceaseless wheel. In your world, tools aren't just things to use. They are companions, secret enemies, little gods you both worship and curse. Hammers, tongs, anvils, chisels, bellows, water buckets, grindstones, each with its own personality. Each one you must live with every day like a family that never lets you leave. First, the hammer. It's your extended arm, the heart of the craft. Your father always said, "People look at a hammer to know if a blacksmith is good or worthless." Yours isn't shiny like in legends. Its head is chipped, its wooden handle cracked, soaked with sweat and blood. Every strike on the anvil is both heroic and cruel. But don't think the hammer is loyal, it's betrayed you many times. One slip, one wrong blow, and blood spurts from your finger or bones shake as if breaking. And your father only roars, "Strike again, don't be weak." The hammer is both friend and executioner, forging you through endless pain. Then come the tongs, the tool you need but despise. They are your second hands, gripping glowing iron. But they're traitors too, slippery in sweat, pinching your skin, dropping hot steel that nearly burns you alive. Your fingers carry dozens of scars shaped like tong teeth, each one a reminder that tools are never fully on your side. You grip them, clutch them, and every time iron falls your father shouts, "Can't you hold it steady?" And you bow, pick them up, continue. The anvil, the immovable giant at the forge's center. It lies there like a sleeping beast, waiting for you and the hammer to awaken it with blows. Each strike shakes it, shakes your chest. It's the stone heart of smithing, unchanging, cold, indifferent. Yet without it, you could form nothing. You learn to love that ringing clang, even though it hums in your ears all night. The anvil doesn't care if you're tired, doesn't care if your hands shake. It demands precision, rhythm, like a harsh conductor who never forgives mistakes. Chisels, grindstones. Files, they're smaller but far more dangerous. One slip with a chisel and your finger splits open. One mistake with the whetstone and blood soaks the rag wrapped around your hand. You grip the grinder trembling, but you keep going. Because if you don't sharpen, the hammer dulls, the blades dull, and all work halts. You know well, Dull tools are the greatest sin of a blacksmith, like a soldier marching with a broken sword. So, even with pain, you sharpen, listening to the screech like the metal's own lament. And then the bellows, the fire-breathing beast. It doesn't just pump air, it rules the forge's rhythm. When you pull, flames roar, iron glows. When you weaken, the fire dies, your father thunders. The bellows are huge, heavy, the rope rough against your small palms. Pull hundreds of times, arms trembling, shirt drenched in sweat. But pause for even a moment, and coals cool. Work stalls, punishment falls. The bellows torture you, yet you must appease them, like a wild horse obeying only the lash. Even the water bucket, seemingly harmless, becomes a weapon. Quenching red-hot iron, water hisses, boiling, splashing. Drops scald your skin, leaving blisters. Steam blasts in your face, choking you. Yet that hiss is victory metal, hardened, tempered, just like you, beaten by fire and water daily, until nothing soft remains. You learn to treat tools like harsh kin. You wipe them, sharpen them, set them in order. Your father always warned, if tools fail, you fail. And you understood. A cracked hammer, loose tongs, broken bellows means the forge stops, means your stomach empty that night. So, even as they hurt you, you care for them. Because they're not objects, they're survival. Slowly, you realize tools have their own language. Every sound, every vibration carries a message. A hammer's thud too low means the iron's cooling. A strange crack warns a blade is splitting. A rasping screech means the file angle's wrong. You don't need anyone to tell you hear, you touch, you know. Your hands, though calloused, became second eyes, reading what metal and tools whisper. But to earn that hearing and touch, you paid in blood. Your hands don't look human anymore. Fingers twisted, cracked, scarred. Every strike tears skin, raises blisters. But your father only nods. Good, your skin's hardening. And so, your hands became new tools, living tongs, living hammers. Not only the big tools, you're surrounded by swarms of small ones. Rivets, punches, awls, saws. Each one ready to betray. A rivet snapping loose like an arrow into your cheek. An awl slipping, stabbing deep into your palm. Blood dripping, yet the work never stops. You just wrap a rag and go. On. Because tools never wait. They need you, but they grind you down piece by piece. Leather aprons? They exist, but feel like traps. They catch sparks and hot shards, press them against your skin like a burning embrace. Every charred mark a reminder, tools show no mercy. They protect halfway, torture the rest. Yet you wear them without, you die quicker. You live in a twisted relationship, dependent yet tormented. Tools keep you alive but enslave you. Every day you polish, sharpen, arrange them like you're tending an army of weapons. If one breaks, you patch it. If it can't be fixed, it's like losing a limb. And strangely, after years, you begin to feel affection. You name the hammer, curse it when it betrays you, then stroke its handle when work flows smooth. You hate the tongs, but every time they grip steady, you feel relief, as if helped by someone. You curse the anvil, but can't live without its echo. Tools became a deformed family, cruel, painful, yet blood deep. You know you'll never be praised like knights or lords, but when they wield gleaming swords in battle, you know who hammered, sharpened, fastened every piece. When wheels turn, when plows break earth, when doors swing shut, it's the voice of tools you've struck thousands of times. You won't be sung in legend, but tools, the ones you cursed and loved, stand as proof you lived. You laboured. You left your mark on every plank, every field, every blade. Do you know the bitterest thing in a blacksmith's life? Peace. For the villagers, peace is church bells ringing gently, a harvest overflowing with grain, sleep without fear of strange hooves in the night. But for you, peace is the silent enemy, because without war, swords rarely break, armour rarely tears, and your purse empties faster than the forge cools. You take jobs, fixing plough blades, sharpening kitchen knives, bending back a broken door hinge. Each petty chore pays a few coins, a basket of onions, or worse, 3 rotten ones. Someone even hands you a chicken dead for 2 days, saying, "Eat it, still good." You force a crooked smile, take it, knowing tonight's soup will reek. That is peacetime economy. You break your back all day, and in return, you get scraps. Your trade, ironically, thrives only when the world shakes with steel. Just the rumor of the Count is marching to war sets your forge blazing all night. Knights bring dulled swords, dented armor, peasants rush in begging for hundreds of arrows. Mercenaries bang at your door demanding war axes and spears. Pouches of silver clink and spill across the table. You're exhausted, your hands blistered, but your belly is full, your family fed, your house briefly scented with roasted meat instead of thin gruel. War to you is no glory, it's harvest season. You don't wield a blade, but every one you forge, every arrowhead you hammer, brings food to the table. When soldiers pass through the village, you don't tremble like others, because you know they'll stop at your forge before they march. In their eyes, you're the keeper of living steel. And you realize a brutal truth. War feeds you. Peace starves you. Yet you never dare speak it. Imagine saying, "I wish for another battle." The villagers would look at you as a madman, bloodthirsty. But deep inside you whisper, even a skirmish would keep you fed for months. You don't crave killing, you just need broken steel, torn armor, worn-out weapons. That means work. Some nights, you hammer until your eyes blur, the fire lighting your sweat-soaked face. Outside, villagers whisper in fear of enemies, while you pray they don't sign a treaty too soon. Because when the horns fall silent, when the drums stop, the orders vanish. You return to rusty hinges, snapped sickles, and the withered potatoes shoved in your hand. Your economy never stands still. It's a wild horse, galloping when war breaks out, collapsing when peace returns. And you, hammer in hand, cling to it, barely surviving between feast and famine. Have you seen the change in your customers' eyes with the times? When war looms, soldiers enter your forge restless but shining-eyed. They toss silver freely, so long as their swords are sharp, their spears sturdy. They don't see you as some filthy peasant, but as the man holding their lives. "Make it strong, blacksmith, I ride tomorrow," they say, with a hint of respect. But when peace reigns, they drag in leaky pots, dull sickles, shove a few onions into your hand, and leave without another glance. You shift from lifesaver to fix-it man. Their contempt returns with their safety. You're no longer valued, because their survival no longer depends on you. You hate it, but endure. You've learned your worth rises and falls with the blood spilled out there. More battlefields, more value, more peace, more invisibility. And so you live torn, wishing peace for the villagers, but secretly hoping some night stirs trouble at the border. Your economy is crueler still. War brings silver but also debt. Many knights return broke, never paying you, abandoning shattered weapons. You strip them, melt them, hope to turn them into nails, hinges for peasants. The silver barely warms your hand before it's gone. Sometimes war wrecks the villages, ruins crops, starves the people, leaving no one to buy. You stare at the hammer, the anvil, both silent as dead stones. Peace can be like that. But war too, sometimes even worse. Shattering demand when no one's left alive. You learn, your economy doesn't only swing with war or peace, it hangs on luck, on who survives each upheaval. And still, you keep going. Because your hammer can't rest, your forge can't cool. You may hate war, hate peace, but you can't stop smithing. Stop one day, and your belly empties, your house chills, your life collapses. So you swing on, accepting the unfair economy, like farmers accept their harvest, like sailors. Accept the sea. You understand one truth. The blacksmith's life will never be rich. It only rises and falls with the rhythm of war and peace, feast and famine, like the fire in your forge blazing when fed, fading when fuel runs low. And you, standing between smoke and flame, can only keep breathing the scent of iron, in peace or in war. Because that's the fate you cannot escape. Your body was never yours. It belonged to the forge, living material melted and hammered, just like the iron on the anvil. From 6, 7 years old, your skin already knew burns, blisters, and scars piling on scars. Every burn was a mark, every scar an engraving on your flesh. While others grew up with childhood smiles, your face carried soot, burns, smoke stains. People didn't see a child. They saw a withered little blacksmith. Your hands that should have held toys. Drawn pictures became a map of wounds. Calluses grew so thick you no longer felt softness. only lifeless hardness. Every groove, every crack testified to endless labor. When you lifted a cup of water, it trembled because your joints had aged too soon. Fingers twisted, nails black with soot and dried blood. Your hands were no longer human, they were tools, living tongs. Your lungs were no better. Day after day of breathing coal, smoke, metal dust, until coughing became part of your rhythm. You can't remember the last time you breathed clean air. Each morning entering the forge, your throat burned, your chest heavy like a stone pressed down. Sometimes you coughed blood, bright red staining the grey floor, then wiped it away and kept working. Because what does coughing matter when the hammer must fall, when the forge still needs air? Your eyes, trained on the red glare of fire, turned sensitive to everything else. Outside, you squinted like the blind, sunlight stabbing pain. But in the forge's darkness, you read iron's colours, young red, ripe yellow, dangerous white. You lost the gift of seeing far, but grew terrifyingly sharp within arm's reach of the flames. You could guess heat by light alone. Was it a gift or a curse? You didn't know only that your eyes existed to serve metal. Your spine bent early. The small back of childhood hunched like a 60-year-old. Hauling water, leaning over anvils, working bellows all twisted your body. From afar, people spotted your crooked gait. One shoulder sloped, a caved stance, and they whispered, "A blacksmith," as if that warped shape itself was the trade's emblem. At night, when you lay down, sleep wasn't rest. It was another battlefield. You dreamed of hammers crushing your hands, of coals searing your face, of your father's shouts. You jolted awake, drenched in cold sweat, hacking coughs shaking you. No peaceful sleep for a blacksmith. Only brief pauses between rounds of pain. You'd seen the old smith in the village. He sat curled outside his door, coughing raggedly, eyes clouded, ears muffled, teeth gone. He couldn't lift a hammer, but his hands still shook as if remembering the rhythm. He sat like a living ghost, wheezing with every breath, each one sounding like a blade slicing. They said he was 45 but looked 70. That was your future. You understood blacksmith years weren't counted in decades, but in swords forged, armors patched. At 20, you looked 30. At 30, you looked 50. At 40, you were near the end. Few in the trade saw past 50. Fire ate them slowly, smoke strangled their lungs, hammers drained their bones. Death didn't come by blade, it came in bloodied coughs, in collapsing at the bellows one day, never rising again. Yet in that tragedy, your body learned strange adaptation. Pain became normal, coughing routine, scars new skin. You didn't think of lifespan, because the forge allowed no far dreams. It gave only today, maybe tomorrow. You knew better than anyone. Smithing is a race against your own body. However long you worked, that's how long your body endured. No one expected wealth from you, they only whispered. Wonder how long he'll last. And you asked yourself, through long coughs, if you'd see the next harvest. Death in smithing wasn't sudden, it was a slow leak. It began with your bent back, with stabbing pain each time you rose, with coughs stretching minutes. It came when your eyes dimmed, no longer reading metal's colours, when your hands shook, dropping tongs. The forge allowed no weakness. When you couldn't serve it, you were useless. And useless meant death, if not of body, then of spirit. You'd seen a smith collapse at the anvil. He was only in his 40s. One ordinary day, hammering away, then suddenly dropped, gasping, eyes rolling. They dragged him out, laid him on cold ground. He never opened his eyes again. No grand funeral, no trumpets. Only smoke still rising, hammers falling in someone else's hands. His life summed in a whisper. He wore out. It was time. That was the cruel truth. The blacksmith's life had no glorious exit. You didn't die on battlefields like knights, nor in castles like lords. You died in smoke, in silence, when your arms no longer lifted a hammer. People remembered you not by name but by the chipped anvil, the worn hammer. Your years cut short not only by labour but by living conditions. You ate little, slept poorly, breathed smoke more than sky. Winter winds cut through thatch roofs, summer fires roasted you alive. No medicine, no doctors. An infected wound could kill you faster than any sword. Yet within tragedy lay a paradox. You lasted longer than expected. Your body, though abused, was tempered like iron, Your skin thickened, lungs grew used to smoke, ears dulled to noise. You became half human, half metal, enduring with unnatural toughness. You didn't live long, but you lived hard, burning through each day. That's why you rarely saw old smiths. Those who survived became relics, their bodies etched with hundreds of scars, thousands of aches. People looked at them like they looked at ancient anvils, cracked, worn, but still standing. You knew your life wouldn't be long, but what scared you wasn't death. It was the day you dropped the hammer and couldn't lift it again. That was true death. When the forge still burned, the bellows still roared, but you were no longer part of it. You lived each day with that truth, accepting your health wasn't to preserve, but to spend. Every strike was a year shaved off, every smoky breath a step closer to the end. But you didn't stop, because stopping was the end itself. So you carried on back bent, hands calloused, eyes dim, lungs hacking. But the hammer still fell, the anvil still rang, the fire still burned. You lived like a short flame, blazing bright, then fading into ash. And you knew that was the blacksmith's fate. You were never allowed to stand at the front of the village festival. That place was reserved for the lord, for the priest, for those draped in fine clothes and speaking with authority. As the procession passed through the square, you stood in the shadows, hands still black with soot, breath thick with smoke. No one called your name, no one crowned you with flowers. And so you learned to live like a visible ghost, necessary but unseen. Farmers ploughed with blades you forged, hunters carried arrows you hammered sharp, soldiers marched with swords and spears shaped by your hands. Even the church door, the bell frame, the hinges, all bore the marks of your hammer. Yet when they prayed, when they gave thanks, it was to God, to the Lord, not to you. You were only the blacksmith, the shadow behind all the glory. Sometimes you wondered, if you vanished, what would become of the village? Dull ploughs left unsharpened, broken kitchen knives unfixed, torn armor left unpatched. The village would slow, like a wheel without an axle. But while you were there, they treated your work as natural as sunrise, as ordinary as the rooster's crow. Blacksmiths existed to serve, not to be praised. Yet you knew, real power wasn't in a high seat at festivals, but in the lifeless objects everyone needed. The rich may never remember your name, but every time they locked a door, sliced bread, turned soil, they touched your labor. You didn't need their recognition, because this society breathed through the small things you made. You were the silent heartbeat, the hidden machine driving it all. On evenings when villagers gathered to hear minstrels sing of heroes, you sat in a corner. They sang of knights slaying dragons, kings quelling rebellions, princesses saving their people. But you knew, without hammers, anvils, and the blacksmith's hands, no knight had a sword, no king had a crown. You smirked, not needing their songs, because history carved your name not in words, but in steel they held. You had no statue, no grand tomb, but every hinge, every horseshoe, every sword was a living monument to you. When you died, they would remain, serving others, proof you once existed. There was a paradox. You were small in society's eyes, yet held its life and death. If you worked lazily, dull ploughs ruined crops, dull knives cut farmers' hands, weak armor let soldiers fall. Your weakness could doom the community. Yet no one dared say, the blacksmith is the pillar. They called it just another trade. You lived as the Lord's shadow. He gave orders, he wielded the sword, but you had made that sword. He rode into battle, but the hooves beneath him were from your forge. He returned to cheers, while you shoveled ashes, swung your hammer, forgotten. Your silence was the foundation for his glory. And sometimes you felt a quiet pride. Watching a child cut bread with a knife you forged, you saw your work in their smile. Hearing hooves strike cobblestone, you heard your own heartbeat. Every building, every meal, every victory carried your sweat. No one knew, but you knew. And sometimes that was enough. You created strength, but never held power. You stood behind the curtain, never on stage. You were erased from chronicles, but your silence echoed in every nail, every blade, every sword that remained. You were the hidden smith, forging a world without ever receiving thanks. You understood your role wasn't to be remembered, but to let everyone else live. You needed no fame, no glory, because the name blacksmith itself was bound to endurance, to fire and smoke, to the quiet foundation of medieval life. And that, though no one said it aloud, was your true strength. You're standing on the land they called Kemet, the Black Land, the ancient name of Egypt. That name wasn't by chance. It came from the dark silt the Nile left after each flood, the fertile earth that fed a civilization. But for those seeking deeper secrets, that black earth was a symbol of transformation, where death was planted so life could rise. You breathe in, and the musky scent of silt fills your lungs. In that moment, you realize this isn't just soil. It's a doorway into a philosophy of eternal change. You grow up in a world where gods don't just dwell above but hide in every grain of sand, every drop of water. They tell of Osiris, cut to pieces then reborn, the first symbol of dismemberment and reunion. You hear the tale in the beat of drums at the temple, in the incense swirling heavy, and you begin to understand that transformation from death to life, from decay to rebirth, wasn't just myth, it was the formula of the universe. In your hands are clay jars filled with resin, sacred oils, powdered stone. They're not just tools, they're fragments of a primal science. An elder whispers, "Observe the body in the embalming chamber." You tremble, step closer. The scent of pine, resin, cedar oil, myrrh, and frankincense overwhelms decay. You see the body no longer as a body, it's being transformed. Layer after layer of linen soaked in oil wraps it, substance after substance applied to resist rot. This is the first alchemy you ever witness, not turning iron to gold, but mortal flesh into immortal form. In the tomb's shadows, torchlight flickers on carved symbols, eyes of gods, coiling serpents, the key of Ankh. You murmur, and your teacher says, "That is a formula, but not for mixing matter, for guiding souls." You realize that in Egypt, alchemy isn't just matter. It's the blending of body and spirit, of visible and invisible. You hear of Thoth, god of knowledge, writing, and mysteries. They say he left behind the emerald tablet, inscribed with truth. As above, so below. The words haunt you. You look at the star-strewn sky, then at oil bubbling over flame, and see the reflection. The vast and the small, the cosmos and the grain of sand intertwined. Change the small, perhaps change the great. That was the promise of Egyptian alchemy. Transformation wasn't illusion, it was universal law. You learn to grind malachite into green powder, mix it with oil, to paint the queen's eyes. But in every stroke, you glimpse philosophy. Colour not just for beauty, but to guard the soul from evil. You learn to melt gold in a small furnace, not for wealth, but as an offering to Ra, the undying light. You learn each metal, each material, carries a soul. Gold eternal like the sun, silver pure as the moon, copper strong as blood, iron sharp as Seth's blade. Among embalming rites, you watch priests stand solemn with obsidian knives, chanting. They use natron salt to drain the body, then anoint with fragrant oils to keep skin whole. Every step precise, a recipe of chemistry mixed with magic. And you see, Egypt found a way to stretch existence, not through hollow promises, but through meticulous practice. You don't see laboratories with glass flasks or beakers. You see embalming rooms, clay ovens, bronze cups, earthen bowls. This was the laboratory of the ancients, where priests were alchemists, where science and religion blurred. You stand in the incense haze, clutching a lump of resin, and you know you're holding a fragment of a great philosophy, transformed to endure. You step into the temple, sunlight streaming through high slits, striking the golden statue of a god. They say gold doesn't tarnish, doesn't vanish, that it's the metal of gods. Touching it, you feel cold, heavy, unmoving, but to Egyptians, it was alive, a fragment of eternity. And you begin to see why gold lay at the heart of alchemic dreams. It wasn't wealth, but immortality made metal. You watch priests work with colour, red for blood and life, green for protection, black for Nile's soil where death turned to new life. When they painted gods, it wasn't just art, it was philosophy. Every colour a formula, every line a prayer. And you realise, Egyptian alchemy began not with greed, but with a communal yearning to keep souls eternal, to keep the cosmos turning. Your teacher hands you a papyrus scroll, filled with hieroglyphs. He says, Read, but remember, each sign is a world. Your lips tremble through the words, instructions appear. Take limestone, burn it, mix with water, transform into white powder. You follow, watch stone die, reborn as lime, fizzing, burning hot. In that moment, you're struck matter can change, die, then resurrect as something new. That was alchemy's essence, transformation as truth. You learn the link between man and cosmos is written in the language of change. Sunrise is rubedo, the red of completion. Sunset is negredo, the black of destruction. The full moon is albedo, the white of purification. You look at nature and see it as the grand laboratory, where the universe itself performed alchemy daily. You hear that priests used powders and oils not only to preserve bodies, but to craft medicine. Some salves healed wounds, some numbed pain, others drifted the mind into dreamlike states. You taste a drop, your tongue numbs, your head swirls, stars spin, your body floats. You understand, alchemy didn't just change matter, it shifted perception, consciousness, soul. You watch a mummy laid into a coffin, mouth inscribed with spells, hands clasping the ankh. They say, he will live forever in duat. And you wonder, perhaps alchemy did that. It didn't erase death, but turned death into a doorway. It didn't deny decay, but made it preparation for rebirth. Looking up at the night sky, you see the Milky Way stretch like a celestial Nile. You realize all Egyptians did, from embalming, melting gold, grinding gems, writing formulas, was mimic the grand workings of the cosmos. They didn't invent alchemy. They discovered the universe itself was an eternal forge, where all things were burned, reshaped, reborn. You sit by the Nile, handful of black soil in your palm, eyes lifted to the stars. You see it clearly. In this earth lies death, in those stars lies life, and in your heart lies the longing to bridge them. That was the root of Egyptian alchemy, a silent vow that nothing is lost, only transformed. And that man, with hand and mind, could learn to join in that transformation, co-creating with the gods. You leave the familiar banks of the Nile, carrying with you the scent of pine resin and ashes from embalming chambers, to step onto another land, Persia. Here, there is no sacred river stretching like the veins of the cosmos, but desert winds lashing sand against your face, mountains rising harsh like walls defying the gods. Yet it is in this severity that a new philosophy is born, another alchemy, deeper and fiercer. You hear Persians speak of Zoroaster, the prophet they revere. He didn't teach turning iron into gold or keeping corpses from decay. He taught of light and darkness, of Ahura Mazda, the god of light, and Angra Mainyu, the god of destruction. To you, it resounded like hammers on anvils. The universe was a battle, relentless, between purity and corruption, order and chaos. If Egypt had whispered, to you that all things transform, Persia screamed in your face that transformation itself was the battlefield. You enter a fire temple, where the sacred flame blazes eternal. The scent of burning wood mixed with oil, smoke curling like serpents. The priest tells you, this fire is the symbol of purity. It burns away lies, leaves only truth. You gaze into the flame and see clearly that Persian alchemy wasn't just in clay jars, but in the act of keeping light alive against darkness. You begin to study new substances, yellow sulfur, liquid mercury, strange minerals mined from volcanic earth. You inhale their fumes stinging, burning as if each element screamed, demanding you grasp its soul. Your Persian teacher says, each substance carries a nature. Sulfur is fire, mercury is water. Together they mirror the duality of the universe. Your hand shakes watching mercury flow like a silver snake in the bowl, recalling Egypt's words, as above, so below. But this time you see a new truth. As pure, so impure in purity lies poison. In light lies shadow. Then you hear of a Greek living in these lands, Zosimos of Panopolis. They say he wasn't just an alchemist, but a dreamer, one who wrote down his visions. For the first time, you read his pages, filled with strange images. Men dismembered, then reassembled, serpents devouring their tails, souls rising from molten metal. You thought it myth, but your teacher said, no, that is spiritual alchemy. Zosimos didn't just care for copper to gold or potions of immortality. He wrote that the human soul itself needed to be melted, burned in the furnace of suffering. hammered under merciless blows. Only then could it become something pure. You read and saw yourself in it. Blistered hands, coughing lungs, bent bones, wasn't that another form of tempering, reshaping you into new metal? In one passage, Zosimos describes a dream. He was locked in a furnace, cut open, blood mingling with fire, his body turning, into spirit rising skyward. You shuddered, for it echoed Egyptian rites, flesh decaying while souls flew to Duat. But here was the difference. Egypt preserved the body, Zosimos destroyed it, freeing spirit. You began to experiment as he did. You tossed bits of copper into fire, added sulfur, added mercury, waited. They frothed, smoked with poison, turned into vile black sludge. You coughed, eyes burning, nearly fainted. But then, for an instant, you saw a shimmer of metallic light flash in the muck. Not gold, but a promise of change. You understood why Zosimos called alchemy the religion of suffering. Truth demanded the price of flesh. You read deeper into his manuscripts. He wrote that every metal was a soul asleep, lead heavy, dark and imprisoned soul, gold shining, eternal a soul redeemed. Alchemy was the journey of the soul, from weighty shadow to radiant light. You laid your hand on a bar of lead, felt its cold heaviness like guilt. You imagined its release, shining like the Sunday. Just like you, burdened with wounds, hoping one day your soul would no longer be heavy. In Persia, you heard much of purification, not only in metals but in people. Zoroastrians bathed in holy water, prayed before sacred fire, kept bodies clean so souls remained unstained. Zosimos borrowed the idea and wrote, "As metal needs fire to purge dross, man needs suffering to purge desire." You read it, thought of your calloused hands, your nights coughing blood, and realized perhaps ordinary hardship itself was alchemy, the alchemy of life. Zosimos's symbols haunted you. The snake devouring its tail, Ouroboros, appeared in your sleep. It was death and life, ending and beginning. You saw it in the fire's cycle. Coal burning to ash, ash feeding earth, earth growing trees, trees cut for fuel. Everything returning to itself, like that serpent. You understood. Alchemy wasn't a single act, but an endless circle. You also saw his darker images. Men beheaded, blood, turning to gold, bodies boiling in cauldrons, souls escaping. To common eyes, nightmares. But to Zosimos, the language of truth. He believed only by dying could one be reborn. And you, staring into a tarnished bronze mirror, seeing a face aged beyond its years, knew you had died many times in the forge, in smoke, reborn each morning with hammer in hand. Zosimos wasn't an alchemist for wealth. He was a scribe of a strange religion, the religion of transformation. And you, reading his words, felt like a disciple, though you never entered a temple. You began to believe every drop of sweat, every scar, was part of a ritual. You weren't just a blacksmith, you were an alchemist too, not turning copper to gold, but pain into strength, toil into endurance. One night, as desert winds howled like funeral horns, you watched the forge fire blaze and saw Zosimos's figure inside. He neither smiled nor scowled, only stared deep, as if to ask, "Are you ready to be melted so your soul may be purified?" You shivered, but inside, the answer was clear. You had been melting all along, in your own life. And you realized, Persia and Zosimos only named what you had already lived, the alchemy of humanity, the transformation of fragile flesh into resilient spirit. You leave the Persian fire temples, where desert winds howl and Zosimos left haunting dreams, and step into another world, brighter, busier, and overflowing with knowledge. The Islamic world of the 8th to 13th centuries. The stone-paved streets of Baghdad, the crowded markets of Kufa, the vast libraries of Damascus, all open before you, filled with the scent of ink, paper, and spices from every corner of the earth. You've never seen a place where knowledge flows like a river. People translate books from Greece, from India, from Persia, from Egypt, the ancient writings of Aristotle, Galen, Pythagoras, all copied into Arabic script, flowing like drifting sand. And in the midst of that sea of words, you hear one name ring like a hammer on an anvil. Jabir ibn Hayyan, later known in the West as Geber. They say Jabir wasn't just an alchemist, but the father of chemistry. He entered the laboratory, not with the naive dream of turning copper into gold, but with the hunger to find the laws behind transformation. You see his lab for the first time, and you're stunned. No longer only clay bowls over coals, but rows of glass flasks, distillation tubes coiled like serpents, polished copper cauldrons, ceramic test tubes, and scales precise to the smallest grain. This was no longer the forge of souls of Zosimos, it was a factory of intellect. You're shown how to work. Pour liquid into a flask, heat it slowly, watch vapor rise and condense into pure drops. This is distillation, the art of separating the essence from the crude. You smell distilled alcohol, sharp yet clear, and realize this is alchemy of life itself. From sludge, they draw fragrance. From raw resin, they draw medicine. Jabir says, everything has 4 qualities: hot, cold, moist, dry, and balance between them defines its nature. You recall Zoroaster's light and darkness, Egypt's life and death. Now the Muslims bring you another system, balance, not destruction, not dream, but equilibrium. If gold is incorruptible, it is because its qualities are perfectly balanced. You experiment under Jabir's guidance. You heat sulfur and mercury, distill acid from vinegar, crystallize salt from seawater. Each experiment a lesson. Heat can separate moisture, dryness can draw out cold. Suddenly, you see the universe as a vast laboratory, with God as the supreme alchemist. The Muslims don't stop at rituals or symbols. They turn alchemy into systematic science. They record, test again and again, measure, compare. You leaf through Jabir's thick books, tiny script detailing every procedure. Gone are the blood-soaked dreams of Zosimos here, are exact recipes. How much heat, how much liquid, how long. You realize, this is the turning point. Alchemy was growing up, from myth to experiment. But still, there was sacredness in every drop. Jabir whispers, we do this not just to make medicine or metals, but to mirror the balance Allah placed in the universe. You feel reverence in his words. For him, science didn't oppose religion. Science was the way to read the hand of God. You walk the markets of Baghdad and see the results of these studies. Perfumes distilled from roses, amber, resins, ointments healing wounds, alcohol disinfecting, dyes colouring fabrics bright. These things weren't just beautiful or useful, they were proof that alchemy had entered daily life. And you think, in Egypt, alchemy preserved the dead. In Persia, alchemy tempered the soul in fire. But here, alchemy nourished the living. You follow Jabir's students to the House of Wisdom in Baghdad. Thousands of books stacked high, parchment and leather filling the air with musty scent. Scholars argue without pause, debating Aristotle, Galen, Hermes. You sit among them, their voices clashing like hammer strikes, and realize knowledge here was forged like iron in a smithy. One scholar declares, every metal is only an imperfect stage of gold. Another counters, no, gold is its own essence, not a final form. Arguments rage through the night, but no one tires for them. Alchemy isn't an answer. It's the search itself. You're taught of elixir, the elixir that could turn base metals into gold, heal sickness, extend life. You smile faintly, remembering Egypt's vague promises, Persia's bloody visions. But here, elixir is written in formulas, in notes, in experiments. They believe they can reach it, with patience, with method. You watch them make nitric acid from saltpeter, sulfuric acid from alum, aqua regia that can dissolve gold, the once eternal metal. You're stunned, for this proved, even gold wasn't immortal. And you realize Islamic alchemy didn't worship matter. As divine it dared to test, to break. For them, truth was higher than worship. Yet even with all their experiments, there was still the sacred. Each success wasn't only triumph, they prayed, they bowed. They believed they had uncovered a secret Allah had hidden. And you shivered. Perhaps each experiment wasn't only science, but revelation. You step from the library, walk along the Tigris, moonlight reflecting off turquoise domes. You see Baghdad, not just as a city, but as a colossal furnace where knowledge from Egypt, Persia, Greece, India, all mixed, evaporated, crystallized into something new. It was social alchemy, intellectual alchemy. And you understood, the Golden Age wasn't just a phrase, it was truth. Humanity was distilling its own wisdom here, passing it westward to ignite a new age. In that moment, you felt yourself a speck of dust, yet a witness to a great transformation. And you whispered, alchemy wasn't just in glass flasks, but in human history itself, where knowledge was heated, tested, struck, then shone like pure gold. Now you set foot in medieval Europe, a world colder, darker, where muddy streets mixed with horse dung, where churches rose like stone mountains, and where knowledge was hidden under the church's veil of suspicion. Here, you don't walk straight into vast libraries like the House of Wisdom. Instead, knowledge slips through narrow gates, translations from Toledo, manuscripts copied in Spanish monasteries. They translate Jabir, Aristotle, Hermes Trismegistus into Latin. You hold a worn manuscript in shaky Latin script, and it feels like hearing Baghdad's voice in rough form. But strangely in Europe, alchemy wasn't just read, it was dreamed. You hear them whisper about the philosopher's stone. No longer just Jabir's balance, nor Egypt's rituals, but a bold dream. A mystical substance that could turn all metals into gold, heal the sick, and grant immortality. You sit in a cold room, candlelight, flickering, and hear alchemists whisper, if we had the stone, we'd not only be rich, we'd live forever. You look around at gaunt faces, red eyes from smoke and sleepless nights. They weren't knights or priests. They were dreamers, daring to believe that in soot and slag might lie the secret of eternal life. You learn of the magnum opus, the great work Alchemy's Path, in 4 stages. Nigredo, blackening, albedo, whitening, citrinitas, yellowing, and rubedo, reddening. You sit before an iron cauldron, watching a mixture bubble black nigredo, death, decay, then a milky white albedo, purification, then pale yellow citrinitas, finally, red like blood rubedo. You shiver, for it wasn't just colours in a pot, but colours of life itself. Death, cleansing, rebirth, fulfillment. In long nights, you read texts full of riddles. The dragon must devour its own tail. The phoenix must burn to rise again. They sound like myths, but alchemists believe them coded truths. You look up at crude drawings. Serpents, sun, moon, couples embracing all symbols of change. And you see, in Europe, alchemy wasn't just science. It was art of symbols, where images replaced formulas, dreams replaced experiments. But because of that, you must stay cautious. The church eyed alchemy with suspicion. To them, it was sorcery, witchcraft, danger. You hear of alchemists interrogated, burned alive. You see them hide manuscripts in walls, write in green language only initiates understood. They drew strange books like Mutus Liber, the Silent Book, no words, only images, to deceive the powerful. You feel you've stepped into a parallel world. By day, people prayed, farmed, drank weak ale. By night, in cellars, fire roared, fumes swirled, and dreamers whispered of the philosopher's stone. And you, in the smoke, feel a stirring. Maybe transformation wasn't just in metals, but in the human soul. You sink deeper into alchemy's medieval life. In monasteries, monks secretly mixed herbs, distilled spirits, experimented with minerals. They filled diaries with symbols, for gold, for silver, for iron, for copper. Each symbol was planet, metal, God at once. You stare at the page, feeling you're reading a map of the universe itself. You hear of those who spent their lives chasing the stone. Some sold everything for copper, lead, sulfur, dying poor in rooms of shattered flasks. Some thought they succeeded when they made strange red powder, but it was only worthless iron oxide. You smile bitterly, mocked by villagers, yet they stumbled onto dyes, glazes, compounds. Their failures laid groundwork for future triumphs. You see another truth. Not all sought gold or immortality. Many saw the magnum opus as inner journey. Nigredo wasn't just chemicals, but soul's despair. Albedo, cleansing from sin. Citrinitas, awakening. Rubedo, union with the divine. You look at your calloused hands, your weary nights, and you understand, alchemy wasn't only in the furnace, it was in the heart. But life won't let you dream forever. You witness a friend accused of black magic. They drag him to the square, tie him to a stake. Flames roar, smoke billows. His face twists, but his eyes blaze, as if saying, This fire is just another experiment. You turn away, but the stench of burning flesh clings, reminding you the price of knowledge in medieval Europe was blood and ash. Still, alchemy survived, spreading hand to hand, manuscript to translation, monastery to castle. You hear in Paris, London, Prague, some still experiment. You hear of Nicholas Flamel, rumoured to have found the stone. Legends spun, making him immortal in stories. You don't know truth, but you know one thing. Myth itself kept alchemy alive. And on freezing nights, you sit by the furnace, watching flames glow, hearing copper hiss in the pot, and you see all Egypt, Persia, Baghdad converging here. Europe wasn't as brilliant as Baghdad, nor as majestic as Egypt, but it had something no place else did, obsession bordering on despair. They believed, at any cost, they could reach immortality, perfection, and that obsession, scorned and hunted, built a tradition lasting centuries, paving the way for Newton, Boyle, Paracelsus. You sigh, knowing you're just a speck in this endless tale. But like metals in the furnace, you feel yourself changing, not into gold, but into one who knows truth isn't in God's hands, nor only in churches, but in the fire, the smoke, the dream of mankind that never dies. You change your face, put on a new mask, secrecy. When the church stares with suspicion, when the crowd calls you a sorcerer, knowledge can no longer be public. It must go underground, become a secret order, a symbol, a text only the initiated can understand. You enter a small room, candles burning low, the smell of beeswax mixed with rotting wood. Around you, hooded faces with only eyes glinting. They whisper a name, Rosicrucians, the Brotherhood of the Rosy Cross. Their symbol is a rose upon a cross, at once religious image and code. You see petals red as blood embracing a black cross, and you understand this is the union of two worlds, spiritual and material, life and death, light and shadow. In the ritual, they hand you a thick wooden-bound book, cover etched with a serpent swallowing its tail. You open it to strange drawings, sun and moon joined, phoenix in flames, men boiling in cauldrons. You read vague Latin lines, and it feels like entering another language, the green language. None outside the order can read it. That was how knowledge survived, through ambiguity, through symbols mocked by outsiders but trembling with truth for insiders. You hear of another brotherhood, the Freemasons. They didn't just build churches and castles, but also a system of symbols. The compass, the square, the rough stone, and the perfected stone. Not only tools of masonry, but metaphors for man. From crude to refined, from flawed to perfected. You touch a polished stone, smooth after hours of chiseling, and you understand that is you, your soul carved in alchemy's furnace, hoping one day to become the cornerstone of a grand design. In the shadows, books like Mutus Liber, the silent book, circulate. You hold it, turning pages. No words, only images. Men hauling water, rivers flowing, sun rising, moon setting, a naked couple under the heavens. To ordinary eyes, nonsense. But you, who lived fire and smoke, see each picture as a formula. Water with fire, sun with moon, not love, but sulfur with mercury, matter with spirit. You realize the darker alchemy grew, the more complex its disguises. It hid itself in poetry, metaphor, illustration. Texts no longer wrote, "Mix sulfur with mercury," but let the god and goddess meet under moonlight. Chemical formulas told as love stories, myths. That was how alchemy endured, by becoming culture, art, impossible to erase. But because of this, you lived double lives. By day, blacksmith, healer, monk. By night, you opened manuscripts by candlelight, trembling as you copied lines. You hid books in walls, marked doors with symbols, carved signs into rings. You didn't dare say, "I seek the stone," but you could say, "I seek the rose on the cross." And those who knew would understand. As Europe entered the Renaissance, you felt the air shift. Artists painted alchemical symbols into their works. Architects hid compasses, squares in cathedral designs. Knowledge slowly emerged from darkness, still wearing a cloak of mysticism. You walked Florence, Venice, Prague, seeing phoenixes, suns, moons on walls. People thought them decoration. You knew. They were secret codes, the language of underground brotherhoods. You once heard a master say, "Symbols are the strongest weapon." They pass through time, through fire, through blades, and still live. You thought back Egypt, left the eye of Horus, Persia, left fire, Baghdad left script, and now Europe left dragons, roses, crosses, phoenixes. Alchemy didn't die, it just changed its storytelling. And while crowds laughed, calling you a dreamer, you looked closer and saw. They wore clothes dyed with alchemical pigments, drank spirits distilled with alchemical methods, read books printed on paper, whitened by alchemical solutions. They laughed, but lived in a world secret societies had built. It was a bitter smile, but also sweet reward. You didn't need sunlight, because you knew your hidden fire was already warming all of society, whether they admitted it or not. You sit in an old stone room, candlelight dancing across manuscripts filled with ornate symbols, dragons, phoenixes, suns, moons. But then you realize the century is changing. Outside, Renaissance bells echo, and Europe's sky brightens with stars Galileo just revealed through a telescope. No longer only myth and symbol, now there are telescopes, mathematics, observation. And you, who once drew the Ouroboros on walls, must face a bitter truth. The world no longer wants misty dreams, but cold numbers. You hold in your hands The Sceptical Chimist by Robert Boyle. Fresh pages, ink still sharp. You read line by line and feel a strange wind blow through. Boyle writes not in metaphor, not in poetry, but in clear words. We cannot rely on Aristotle's 4 elements. You sit silent, as if hearing someone smash the old idol you once worshipped. The 4 elements, earth, water, fire, air, once pillars of alchemy. Now Boyle throws them away, replacing them with chemical elements. You give a broken smile, both hurt and amazed. There were those bold enough to name the raw truth. You begin learning to see matter with new eyes. No longer metal is a soul awaiting release, but metal is made of tiny particles that can combine and separate. Boyle teaches experiment, test, record, repeat. No longer dream the philosopher's stone will appear in. Visions, but pour liquids, measure heat, weigh mass. You watch alchemy turning into something else, not flying through symbols but walking on the steady legs of science. Yet you feel torn. Deep inside, you still love the symbols, the green language, the mysterious drawings. You remember the phoenix aflame, the serpent devouring itself, Zosimos's eyes in fire. Now all dismissed as foolish, superstition. You feel like a child abandoned between 2 worlds, one of alchemical dreams, the other of chemical truths. Then you meet Antoine Lavoisier, the man they call the father of modern chemistry. You see him in a bright room, scales precise to the grain. He weighs gases, measures mass, writes the law of conservation of matter. Nothing is lost, nothing created, everything transforms. You stand stunned for that phrase. At its core was Egypt's ancient dream, eternal transformation. But different now, Lavoisier speaks not in myth, but in numbers. He has stolen your poetic tongue, replacing it with formulas. And so alchemy, in that instant, became chemistry. You walk the streets, see people growing used to molecules, elements, oxygen, hydrogen. You see medicines compounded, explosives manufactured, metals refined with scientific precision. You understand. What you once called alchemy now wears new clothes, no longer secret, no longer hidden orders, but public science. And you, who once whispered codes in dark cellars, must face a world lit as bright as lamps. You move through the 18th and 19th centuries, and new names appear: Priestley, Dalton, Avogadro. They no longer write poems or draw dragons and phoenixes, but propose atomic theory, chemical formulas, reaction equations. You look at Mendeleev's periodic table squares in neat rows, each a truth, each an element. You smile faintly, recalling the old symbols. Yesterday's icons now become Au, Ag, Phi, Q. The old didn't die, it only changed. Language. You enter a modern lab, bright with oil lamps, shelves lined with glassware, tubes coiled with precision. No more dark cellars, no more hiding. Now knowledge is public printed books, lectures. You remember hiding the mutus liber under robes and laugh. If the masters saw this, they'd believe the world itself had turned to magic, the magic of openness. Yet you see a bitter truth. As chemistry took the stage, alchemy was pushed into history's pit. They mocked it as superstition, as folly. They called you and your brothers fools, dreamers. You grow angry, yet cannot deny. It was those errors, those dreams that paved the road. Without you, there'd be no them. Without dreams of the stone, no sulfuric acid in a flask. Without obsession for immortality, no periodic table. You stand at history's crossroads. On one side, mystical fire. On the other, scientific flame. You know your era, the age of alchemy, is over, but you also know its soul lives. For when a scientist holds a pipette, measures, distills, he does what you once did. The difference? He calls it experiment. You called it ritual. You smile, realizing that deep down both are the same. Both believe in transformation, that matter doesn't stand still, that humans can grasp and command it. You hear Egypt's whisper. Black earth becomes life. You hear Persia's wind, light and darkness in battle. You hear Baghdad's voice, balance of four qualities. You hear medieval Europe's dream, the stone. And now, all those voices merge into H2O, into O2 plus C to CO2. You understand, alchemy never died, it transformed, true to its eternal promise. It turned dream into truth, symbol into formula, secret into science. And you, witness of the journey, nod quietly, knowing at last, alchemy had completed its own magnum opus, transforming itself into modern chemistry. When Mendeleev's periodic table was born, when laboratories glowed with oil lamps, alchemy was locked into museums. But then you realized it didn't die. It only changed shape, retreating from coal furnaces and glass flasks to hide in dreams, in symbols, and in the very psychology of man. You heard the name Carl Gustav Jung, a Swiss psychiatrist. He didn't wear a wizard's hat or stand before boiling cauldrons, but he read the texts of Zosimos, Hermes, the Mutus Liber, and he declared, alchemy wasn't foolishness. It was a map of the soul. You read his words. The alchemical process reflects the process of individuation transforming the self into the whole. You shivered, for the first time seeing someone tie the smoky old laboratories to the modern mind. Jung said nigredo, the black stage, was when a person faced the darkness inside. Albedo, the whitening, was purification, learning to see and accept oneself. Citrinitas, the yellowing, was when the light of awareness began to rise. And rubedo, the reddening, was union, becoming whole. You remembered hopeless experiments, exploding flasks, nights dreaming of Ouroboros. Now you understood. All of it was metaphor for the inner journey every human must walk. You thought about your own life. The coughing fits in the forge that was nigredo, the devouring dark. The nights copying formulas by candlelight that was albedo, purification through endurance. The flash of light in a failed experiment that was citrinitas. And the moment you accepted alchemy's transformation into chemistry that was rubedo, completion. You laughed. You'd lived your life inside a psychological process. Jung simply gave a new name. But it wasn't just psychology. You stepped into the modern world and saw alchemy everywhere. In novels, in films, in rock music, even in video games. You saw Harry Potter speak of the Philosopher's Stone. You saw Full Metal Alchemist turn alchemy into battle power. You saw bands take Ouroboros as their emblem. Whether in entertainment or art, people still return to the images you once lived. The serpent, devouring itself. The phoenix reborn. The transformation of the soul. You walked through a bookstore and saw shelves of spiritual alchemy, financial alchemy, creative alchemy. People had turned the word into a metaphor for every transformation. Idea into product, suffering into art, ordinary into myth. You shook your head. They never smelled sulfur, never tasted mercury's bitterness, yet they still used your language, still lived in your shadow. And even in language, alchemy endured. When someone said, turning lead into gold, they meant a miracle, not a lab. When someone said elixir, they meant not a potion, but love's eternity or youth's fountain. Words once written in blood, smoke, and sweat now sold perfumes and lotions. You laughed but bitterly. Alchemy had become common speech stripped of its ashes. You realized a truth. Modern alchemy was no longer about mixing sulfur and mercury, but about symbolizing transformation itself. Humans still searched for their own stone, career, love, enlightenment. They no longer asked, "How do I turn copper into gold?" but "How do I turn failure into strength, pain into wisdom?" And that, in its own way, was still alchemy. Jung said, Ouroboros, the serpent, eating its tail, was the perfect image of the soul, devouring its own pain, reborn from itself. You saw that symbol on t-shirts, company logos, tattoos on young arms. They thought it was fashion, style. But you knew. It was an ancient reminder that everything cycles, that transformation is eternal. In music, you heard bands name albums, Rubedo, Nigredo. In literature, poets used alchemy to speak of love, loneliness, rebirth. In science, no one said alchemy, but the spirit lived. Physicists spoke of particle transformations, biologists of gene transformations, engineers of energy transformations, all echoing one principle: nothing is lost, only changed. You walked through modern labs with electron microscopes and particle accelerators. You heard them speak of protons, neutrons, electrons. You marveled. This was only another way of saying what you once believed. Beneath the surface lay a deeper essence, one that could be split and transformed. They no longer called it alchemy, but they lived its dream. You also saw alchemy return in spiritual movements. White-robed seekers sat in meditation halls, speaking of inner alchemy, sexual alchemy, energy alchemy. They quoted Jung, Hermes, even ancient Egyptian texts. Many turned it into business, yes. But some truly found healing alchemy as a path for the soul. And you thought, perhaps that too is a kind of rubedo. You stopped before a mirror, staring at your own face. No longer a medieval blacksmith, no longer a student of Jabir, no longer a dreamer of the stone. Now you were witness to something strange. Alchemy lived for thousands of years, shedding skins, from Egyptian clay to modern labs, from Persian temples to New York bestsellers. And you understood. It never died. For it was the life of an idea, the idea that everything can transform. You took a long breath and heard echoes in the wind, the hammer of the smith, the prayers of priests, the ink of Arabic scribes, the whispers of secret orders, the lectures of chemists, and Jung's words of the soul, all blended into one song, the song of transformation. And you knew, alchemy, in its modern form, still sings through psychology, through culture, through language, and through you. It's the 1960 seconds, and you're just a Turkish farmer swinging a pickaxe against the soft stone wall of your own house. You only mean to carve out a little cellar to store food, but then the blade strikes a hollow echo. You pause, tap again. Stone crumbles away to reveal a black gap. Cold air pours out, carrying the damp, mouldy breath of something sealed for thousands of years. Your hands shake, but curiosity wins. You shine a light inside, and there it is, a staircase spiraling down, into the earth. A doorway has just opened to a world no one imagined. Archaeologists rush in when they hear. Each pick, each fallen stone, reveals twisting corridors, chambers large enough to hold dozens of people. You follow them down, heart pounding. With every step you realize this isn't a cellar, not a storeroom for grain or wine. This is an entire city. A city buried alive beneath the soil, waiting in silence. They call it Derinkuyu, deep well. And deep it island. The further you descend, the more you feel swallowed by the earth. Narrow, damp stairways drop level after level. Each floor reveals living quarters, stables, churches, kitchens, pantries, all carved straight into volcanic rock. The flashlight beam flickers over grey ash walls, scarred with tool marks left by ancient hands. You touch the rough surface, cold as bone, and a shiver runs through you. Some hand, thousands of years ago, pressed against this very spot. The deeper you go, the thicker the air. Dust and damp choke your lungs. You wonder, how did they live here? Then you see the answer. Massive ventilation shafts, like stone chimneys, piercing down from the surface to the lowest depths. Fresh air once streamed through them, keeping this underground city alive. You tilt your head, dizzy at the sheer height. This wasn't improvisation. This was engineering. You move further and find giant stone wheels blocking passageways. Each one weighs hundreds of pounds, fitted to grooves so they could roll into place. You imagine the moment. Raiders sweep through the village, but the people vanish into the earth, rolling the stones shut. Soldiers hammer at the blocked tunnel, powerless. Down here, families sit in silence, safe in the dark. This wasn't a cellar, it was a fortress. The numbers stagger you. Nearly 280 feet deep, at least 18 levels, room for 20,000 people, plus animals, plus food. And Derinkuyu wasn't alone. Across Cappadocia lie more than 200 underground cities, some linked by tunnels stretching miles. You feel like an ant crawling inside a colossal hive. But this hive was carved by human hands, determined to survive. You close your eyes. Suddenly the silence fills with echoes of life. Women hauling water, children chasing each other through the corridors, men sharpening blades. Hymns rise from a chapel, torchlight flickers against stone walls. Above, chaos and fire. Below, life goes on. You open your eyes, standing in the damp dark, and swear you can still hear them whispering. You go deeper, grasping the scale. Not just homes, but storerooms for wine, classrooms, chapels, stone troughs where cattle were once kept. The air would have been thick with hay, manure, smoke. Hard to breathe, but safer than swords and fire outside. You stop at a large chamber, where sound echoes against the high ceiling. Archaeologists call it a meeting hall, maybe even a school. You picture a teacher's voice booming through the stone, children's faces glowing in torchlight. Nearby, a chapel, its walls etched with crosses. Songs of faith once filled this darkness, turning claustrophobic caves into sanctuaries, and you begin to see Cappadocia as an entire underground network cities, linked by tunnels up to 6 miles long. One could walk from Derinkuyu to Kaymakli without touching the surface. A hidden world beneath the visible one. The origins are debated. Some say the Hittites dug the first tunnels 3,000 years ago. Others claim Byzantines expanded them when Arab armies advanced. Whatever the truth, generation after generation dug deeper, widened further, layer upon layer of history carved into stone. Archaeologists sketch maps hundreds of rooms, miles of passageways, vertical shafts, rolling doors. You study the map and shudder. This wasn't a hiding place. This was a mirror city beneath the earth. You stand in a vast chamber, walls rough with ancient pick marks. You press your palm to the cold stone. No statues honor these builders, no. Monuments carry their names. Only scars in rock remain, yet their hands created one of the most astonishing mysteries in the world. And you realize the true scale of Cappadocia isn't measured in miles or meters, but in the relentless human will, the will to survive, even if it meant vanishing into the belly of the earth. You crouch down in the narrow corridor, flashlight tracing each chisel mark cut deep into the soft volcanic stone. Your fingertips brush the rough surface, a chill shooting down your spine. This wasn't the work of days or years, but centuries of labor, patience, and genius. The tough rock of Cappadocia is soft when first dug, but once exposed to air, it hardens, forming a natural fortress. The ancients knew this, and they turned an entire plateau into a sprawling labyrinth. You picture teams of workers, gripping iron picks, bronze axes, stone hammers. Torchlight flickers over soot-streaked faces. Each strike echoes steady and rhythmic. Thunk, thunk, the heartbeat of a hidden city being born. Rubble piles high, hauled out through narrow shafts. No machines, no explosives, just muscle and endurance. Yet somehow, they carved mile-long tunnels, halls vast enough to gather entire communities. The deeper you go, the clearer it becomes. This wasn't random digging. Every step was calculated. Ventilation shafts drop through multiple levels, carrying fresh air. Wells reach down to the water table, ensuring clean drinking water. Massive circular stone doors sit in strategic corridors, smooth, worn, taller than a man, thick as a wall. With a shove, they roll into place, sealing passages and turning tunnels into fortresses. In the deeper levels, you find vaulted ceilings, carved with precision to prevent collapse. Arched stone disperses the weight of the mountain pressing above. Each vault, each pillar, is silent proof of mathematical design knowledge born not from books, but from blood and survival. You notice remnants of smoke channels. Kitchens were placed on mid-levels, where fires burned safely. Hidden flues carried smoke away, dispersing it far from surface eyes. No plumes gave them away, an army above would never suspect thousands living below. The scent of roasting meat, baking bread, and burning wood once rose through these vents, then vanished into thin air, as though the city itself was a ghost. In tight corners, you see vertical shafts so narrow only one person could squeeze through. They were defensive choke points. Any invader forcing their way in would be slowed, trapped, and cut down easily. This wasn't just shelter, it was underground warfare by design. The beam of your flashlight catches faint grooves carved into the walls. Some say they once held oil lamps, lining tunnels with a trembling glow. You imagine hundreds burning at once, shadows of men and women stretching across stone, the underground alive with golden flicker, sacred and terrifying. The layout reveals brilliance. Livestock pens placed separately to contain the stench, pantries near wells to keep food cool, chapels buried deep, both holy and secure, every chamber linked by multi-level passages, an ant colony engineered not by instinct, but by collective human wisdom, refined over generations. You pause before a massive ventilation shaft, bottomless in the beam of your light. Cold air rises, damp and earthy, whispering from the abyss. Without these shafts, thousands would have suffocated. With them, this became not a tomb, but a triumph, a supercity carved beneath stone, not for kings, but for people. And as you tilt your head back, sensing the crushing weight of a mountain above, you shudder. The ancients didn't just build to survive. They defied nature itself, transforming the earth into home, fortress, and legacy. Each strike of their tools wasn't just digging stone, it was writing history, a story that still breathes today in the echoes of these endless halls. On the rocky slope, the dim glow of an oil lamp flickers against the walls, and immediately you hear the sound of life. Not the deathly silence you imagined, but a strange symphony. The giggles of children, the pounding of women grinding grain, the bellow of livestock in stone pens, the drip of water from deep wells. The underground city isn't just a shelter, it's a massive village, breathing, living, beneath dozens of meters of stone. In a small chamber, you see a family gathered around the hearth. Smoke rises from a clay stove, slipping into hidden flues that vanish into darkness. A pot of barley soup bubbles, its aroma mixed with ash hanging heavy in the chamber. The father slices dry bread, the mother drops preserved greens into the pot, and the children huddle close, waiting for their share. The clink of spoons on the pot is like a steady heartbeat of survival. You pass the livestock pens. In the dim glow, shadows of cows, sheep, and goats loom. The air is thick with dung, hay, and animal sweat. A man squeezes milk from a cow, calloused hands steady, humming a mournful tune. Children help scatter hay, careful with every handful. Even underground, the rhythm of herding continues, for without the animals, the people could not endure. In another corridor, women sit spinning thread, hands twisting wool into yarn. The whir of spinning wheels echoes softly. They chat in hushed tones, trading stories of the surface, of villages and seasons past. Laughter bursts out, reverberating through stone walls like distant bells. Cloths hang drying on the walls, dyed with herbs saved from summer. Their daily survival is woven into these threads, clothes, blankets, headscarves for prayer. You enter a larger chamber, perhaps the village hall. Elders sit in a circle, telling children stories of saints and ancestors. Voices tremble, amplified by the stone vaults. Children sit cross-legged, eyes wide in torchlight, picturing holy figures descending or battles long ago. Here underground, memory isn't carved on monuments, but carried by stories. And those stories echo in the stone, becoming the living history of the community. You pass a communal kitchen, where men and women take turns cooking. Thin flatbreads sizzle on hot slabs of rock, filling the tunnels with the smell of life. Someone stirs grape wine, another checks jars of cheese, another mixes honey into warm water for the little ones. Even surrounded by darkness, people carve out the taste of light, flavors of food, of shared meals. The constant shuffle of footsteps fills the passages. Someone hauls water from the well, another drags firewood, another carries grain sacks from the storage to the kitchen. Narrow corridors force them to brush past, smiling faintly, whispering, "Make way," in the dark. These small collisions, these simple greetings, stitch together the rhythm of daily life. When the torches fade, night falls. But night underground is no different from day. Work and rest simply rotate. A man lies down on a reed mat, his steady breathing echoing. Children curl beside their mother, drifting to sleep with no moon or stars, only her soft lullaby. In the absolute darkness, sleep feels like a deep well, swallowing away the day's exhaustion. Part 2. You rise with them as the pounding of grain marks the beginning of a new day. They take turns at the stone mill, grinding barley and wheat. Each strike booms against the walls, carrying down the tunnels. Children practice beside them, weak hands eager to learn. Fine flour falls, gathered carefully to bake bread for all. You follow a group toward the well. They lower a bucket into the depths, hauling up cold, fresh water. It splashes into clay jars, droplets sparkling in torchlight. A woman scoops a ladle, handing it to her child, then drinks herself. The cool water slides down her throat, tinged with stone, faintly sweet from the earth, a lifeline drawn up from the dark. From a small chamber comes the sharp clang of metal. A craftsman sharpens knives, repairs plough blades. Sparks flash as fire flickers in his little forge. His hands tremble with age, but his focus never wavers. Tools are not just for farming or cooking, they are weapons, lifelines. In this hidden world, every blade, every spearhead is a thread of survival. In another corner, young women embroider cloth. They stitch crosses, suns, and waves into fabric. Fingers unsteady, eyes glowing. They know these cloths will one day cover heads in prayer or serve as wedding gifts. Even under endless night, they create beauty, a small flame defying the dark. Between chores, you catch glimpses of joy. Children scratch drawings onto walls with charcoal, crude figures of animals and stars. They chase one another through the tunnels, laughter ringing through the labyrinth. Youth gather with flutes, music rising into the stone vaults, melancholy, longing, yet alive. Though trapped underground, they still laugh, play, and sing, for that is proof they exist. As seasons shift above, rhythms follow below. Herbs hang from rafters, meats smoke in pits, cheeses age in clay jars. Each family holds a share in the common store, for survival depends on sharing. You see barter in action, grain for honey, chickens for wine. Coins mean little here. True currency is food, water, the breath of life itself. When night returns, oil lamps glow once more. Families gather, an old man recounting how their ancestors fled invaders, carving this city into the stone. Children listen wide-eyed, imagining themselves as small heroes carrying on the legacy. His voice, hoarse and echoing, feels like Cappadocia itself speaking through him. You look around and realize that daily life here is a paradox, suffocating yet resilient, confined yet full of creativity. People turn darkness into shelter, stone into walls, fear into strength. And every moment meals, sleep, play, prayer wove together the soul of the underground city. Standing in the cold stone chamber, staring at the jagged chisel, marks on the wall. Whose anonymous hand carved these scars? You don't know. Scholars aren't sure either. Some say the underground cities of Cappadocia may have begun with the Hittites more than 3,000 years ago. Others insist it must be even earlier, perhaps prehistoric, when humans first discovered the softness of tough rock and dug small shelters into it. You picture a band of primitive people, holding wooden picks and sharp stones, gathered around a fire, talking about carving out a hollow to store food away from beasts. That first clumsy strike may have been the seed of a vast labyrinth. Over time, hollows became rooms, rooms connected to rooms, and then to mazes. You hear echoes of the past in your ears, the pounding of picks, heavy breathing, the cheer when a wall of stone collapsed to reveal new space. But why did they go so deep? You crouch through a steep corridor, your flashlight sliding down into a bottomless black. Some say it was to escape wild beasts. Some say to hide from invaders. Others believe the Hittites dug the first cellars as storage, and later generations expanded them during wars. You picture crowds retreating underground as news spread of Assyrian armies marching, rolling shut stone doors, waiting for the storm to pass. Yet the mysteries outnumber the answers. Ventilation shafts rising dozens of meters, who designed them? Massive stone discs weighing tons, fitting perfectly into corridors, who rolled them into place? No inscriptions, no monuments explain it. History here is a book with its first chapter torn out, leaving only the tangled middle. You step into a small chapel deep below. On the wall, a rough cross is carved. Archaeologists say it belonged to early Christians, hiding from Roman or Arab persecution. Which means the underground city was reused over and over, each generation layering its presence. You see clearly, this was not the work of one civilization, but the overlapping labor of Hittites, Byzantines, early Christians. Each left a ghost pressed into the rock. Still, one question haunts. How could humans live underground for months at a time? You shine your light into a giant shaft, feeling as if you're staring into the lungs of the city. Designed with uncanny precision, they still work today. No blueprints, no modern tools, yet the system breathes flawlessly. The enigma deepens. Was this simply accumulated knowledge, or something beyond our modern grasp? You recall Cappadocian folk tales. Some say giants built these cities and left them behind. Others whisper they were carved by beings from another world. You laugh, then shiver. For in this darkness, with wind howling through tunnels, it's hard to tell where fact ends and myth begins. Entering a vast hall, its high ceiling booming with echoes, you feel as though you're standing in an underground cathedral of a vanished people. The long gouges, the marks of tools, all whisper, "We were here." But who we were, no one can say. You shudder at the void, the blank page history left for imagination to fill. Sitting on a stone step, breath heavy in the stale air, it feels like you're inside the belly of some giant creature. And then the question strikes. Was this immense scale only about defense? Some theories suggest the underground city was more than a refuge, but a permanent home for a people who chose the depths. Evidence of stables, kitchens, chapels, schools, even cemeteries. But why abandon the sky, the sun, the fields? Perhaps the surface was too dangerous, endless wars, or harsher climates. You recall legends of volcanic fury in Cappadocia. Maybe the Earth's wrath drove them below. An archaeologist once told you the long tunnels linking cities may have been secret trade routes. You imagine caravans moving through darkness, carrying salt, grain, wine, trading between towns while enemies above never knew. The underground became veins beneath skin, pulsing with hidden life. But there is no proof, only theory. The mystery multiplies. You pass one of the massive circular stones, smooth as a mill wheel, said to block invaders. But who calculated their size, placed them at choke points? Each weighs tons, not easily moved. Your hand on its cold face, you sense a lost skill hidden in the stone. The question isn't just why, but how. The silence of rock grows heavier. It reveals nothing, yet every crack and dead end feels like a cipher. Some tunnels stop abruptly, as if the builders meant to dig further but quit. Some rooms are impossibly large, supported by knowledge we can't explain. Some narrow passages lead suddenly to deep wells, like secret escapes. Everything is both practical and eerily mystical. You recall the look in modern scholars' eyes when they first entered Derinkuyu. They didn't say much, only bowed their heads. Even today, their science falls short. They measure, map, theorize. But the question, who began it, remains unanswered. Was it layer upon layer of generations, or the legacy of a lost civilization, leaving behind only stone and shadow? Exhausted, you lean your head against the wall, listening to echoes. You almost hear ancient footsteps, men, women, children, all blended together. This city is not just stone. It is memory, collective and unresolved. You whisper, "Where did you come from?" But the stone stays silent. It keeps its secret, across millennia, and perhaps forever. At the mouth of the massive ventilation shaft, you inhale the cold draft rising from the depths. In that moment, you're no longer just a visitor. You hear the whispers of thousands of generations who once hid beneath the stone. These walls are not only rock, but memory. The collective memory of a people who survived through extraordinary adaptation. Every chisel mark is an invisible inscription carved into Cappadocia's cultural memory. We were here, we lived, we fought, we prayed. You feel clearly that the underground cities were not merely fortifications, but symbols of resilience. They tell you that humanity can turn darkness into shelter, cold stone into home, despair into hope. In the depth of culture, Cappadocia is proof of community power. No individual could carve an entire city. Only a collective, across generations, could achieve it. The people here left behind a lesson. Survival does not come from lone heroes, but from the joined hands of a community. And that legacy still echoes today, when tourists descend the stone stairways and whisper, "A wonder of humanity." You step into an underground chapel, your light shining on a rough-hewn cross. Here you see not only engineering, but the soul of religion. For early Christians, Cappadocia was a refuge of faith. On the surface, they were hunted and killed. Underground, they could pray freely. The hymns, sung in darkness, were a declaration. Faith may be driven to the depths, but it can never be extinguished. Passing kitchens, stables, schools, you see something else. This is the living heritage of ordinary life. Cappadocia was not a pyramid for kings, nor a temple for elites, but a people's project. They didn't carve it to boast, but to survive. That's why it holds universal meaning. Any people, however small, can create greatness when survival demands it. Today, when travelers from around the globe step into Derinkuyu or Keimakli, they're not just looking at stone. They're walking into humanity's story, a story of endurance. Every photo taken, every breath in the narrow tunnels, continues that memory. Cappadocia is not just in the past. It lives in the present, a museum open to the world. Emerging back to the surface, the blazing Cappadocian sun makes you squint. Yet in your mind, the echoes of darkness remain. And you realize the legacy is not confined underground, it rises into the sky. The hot air balloons drifting over the valleys today are part of the same story. People come not only for the fairy chimneys, but to touch the mystery of the underground cities. This heritage has become a cultural bridge, linking past and present, east and west. It tells us that no matter where we come from, humans share the same fear and the same longing: safety, survival, and faith. You recall the words of an archaeologist. The underground cities of Cappadocia are a mirror of humanity. When pushed to the edge, we don't collapse, we create. Indeed, this heritage is a symbol of creativity under duress. It reminds us that science, architecture, and engineering don't just emerge from wealth or power, but from the raw need to endure. In Turkish culture, Cappadocia is a mythical heartland. Folklore tells of giants carving the labyrinth to guard their treasures, or saints guiding believers underground to escape enemies. Whether true or not, these tales weave Cappadocia into the fabric of collective imagination. It's not just stone and dust, but memory, pride, and living myth. To the world, Cappadocia has become humanity's shared heritage when UNESCO declared it a World Heritage Site. That recognition protects not only stone walls, but the memory of nameless communities who once thrived here. As you walk the narrow passages, you know you're following in the footsteps of farmers, children, priests, the anonymous souls who left behind an immortal legacy. And the deepest message Cappadocia leaves is this: every civilization is fragile, but the will to survive is eternal. The people who built the underground cities may have vanished, but their work still speaks to us. It reminds you that in any darkness, humans will always find a way to light a flame, and that flame, born in Cappadocia's depths, has become cultural heritage for the entire world today. Stepping onto the narrow stairs of Derinkuyu, your flashlight sweeps across the chisel marks on the stone walls. Look closely, and you see some rough and crude, others neat and uniform. Archaeologists say this is the evidence of many generations who worked on this place. And with that, a great secret of Cappadocia is revealed. These underground cities were never finished. In one attempt, they were always expanded, adapted to the needs of each era. You imagine the first Hittite groups, some 3,000 years ago. They only wanted a small hollow in the volcanic rock to store food and hide temporarily. They carved a few crude rooms, linked by narrow passages. But centuries passed. Enemies grew more numerous, dangers multiplied, and later generations no longer felt safe. So they dug again, added more, expanded further. In this way, from small chambers, an entire labyrinth of levels emerged. Walking through the long corridor, you see this passage leading to a granary, that one to a stable. Not everything was built at once, but in layers, in phases. At times they added a chapel, other times a wine cellar, or even a schoolroom for children. The underground city was like a living organism. It grew alongside the community inside it, adapting to the growing numbers and needs. You recall the words of one archaeologist: Cappadocia is proof of evolving architecture, not instant architecture. Indeed, each new level, each branch carved reflects a new fear or a new hope. When wars raged, they dug defensive tunnels. When the population grew, they carved more dwellings. When faith shifted, they built more chapels. There was no master plan, yet across centuries the labyrinth became a coherent whole, functioning as if it had been planned from the beginning. You stop at a steep slope. Your light reveals 2 layers of chisel marks, the inner layer rough, the outer layer smoother. This makes you picture the past. One generation carved, the next widened. The old became the foundation for the new. The city never stopped growing, like a tree sprouting new branches, like a web spun with more threads. That flexibility also showed in how the underground cities connected to each other. At first, Derinkuyu may have been a lone refuge. But over time, as communities needed contact, tunnels were dug to Kaymakli and beyond. Some stretched 8 to 10 kilometers, turning Cappadocia into a vast subterranean network. This proves one thing: the underground city was never static. It constantly reshaped itself for survival and trade. You notice another subtle detail. Newer levels were usually dug deeper than the old. This shows that as danger grew, people were forced to go further underground. Later generations didn't destroy the old, but used it, then dug deeper, as if wrapping more layers of armor around their community. That's why Derinkuyu today has 18 levels. And surely that number is the result of centuries of layering, not one single project. Strangely, despite centuries of flexible expansion, the system still kept its balance and stability. No level collapsed onto another. No room ruined the airflow. These people may not have had modern tools, but through experience and repetition they discovered how to expand without breaking structure. Like a blacksmith who knows when to stop his hammer, the Cappadocian diggers knew when to stop their picks and where to carve safely next. You sit on a stone step, feeling as if you're hearing the echoes of centuries of labor. This city was never a finished, unchanging monument. It was a draft, always in progress. Each generation added a chapter, each swing of a pick, another sentence. And by the time you walk here today, you're not just moving through stone, you're walking through an epic, carved with sweat and fear, expanded and rewritten across thousands of years. In a narrow corridor, your light falls on the deep grooves carved into the stone walls. At the end, you come across a massive circular slab, nearly 2 meters wide, sitting snugly in its groove like a giant wheel. It lies silent, but you can imagine the scene long ago. Just a few people pushing, and the stone would roll across, sealing the passage completely. No army, no matter how large, could force its way through. These doors were silent weapons, turning the entire underground city into a fortress impossible to storm. The brilliance is that these doors weren't placed randomly. They appear at choke points, narrow hallways, sharp bends, spots where intruders would have to duck or march in single file. Once the slab rolled shut, the enemy was trapped, unable to maneuver. The defenders, hidden just beyond, only had to wait. You picture invaders slamming into the unexpected stone wall, panicking in the dark, then hearing shouts echoing from hidden tunnels around them. An ambush perfectly set. Deeper in, you find corridors deliberately carved low. Anyone entering had to crouch, forced to slow down. This was the second trap. If enemies slipped inside, they would be stretched into a long line, unable to fight shoulder to shoulder, unable to raise their shields. The people of Cappadocia only had to stand above, dropping stones or spears downward. In the underground world, numbers didn't guarantee victory. The terrain itself was the greatest ally. At some dead ends, you notice a cunning detail. They weren't mistakes, but traps. The ancients intentionally created narrow passages that led to nowhere. Invaders unfamiliar with the layout would stumble in, thinking they'd found a shortcut, only to face solid walls. While they scrambled in confusion, defenders could roll a stone door shut behind them, cutting off retreat. You imagine a man-made labyrinth where every wrong turn could cost a life. Even the ventilation shafts played a double role. By day, they carried fresh air down to keep the city alive. But under siege, some shafts became false entrances. Many were disguised at ground level, looking like wells or natural pits. If enemy scouts dared climb down, they would drop into mid-level chambers with no exits. All the defenders had to do was roll a stone over the opening, and the intruders were buried alive. You walk into a private, wide chamber where several corridors intersect. Archaeologists believe this was a control room, a place where defenders gathered to hold strategic crossroads. If enemies managed to get this far, they'd be forced to choose a path. But whichever way they went, a stone door could slam behind them. Each chamber like this was a trap waiting to snap shut, turning invaders into prisoners of the maze. What strikes you most is how these mechanisms hid in plain sight. No hinges, no ironwork. Everything relied on gravity and clever carving. The massive slabs, seemingly immovable, sat in finely cut grooves. When needed, a few people could roll them easily, but from the outside, attackers stood no chance of shifting them. It was pure ingenuity, born from natural stone and practical survival. You imagine one distant evening. News comes that raiders are approaching. Families rush children and livestock into the lower levels. Oil lamps flicker, voices echo in haste. Then thud, the great slab rolls into place, sealing the entrance. In the darkness, they hold their breath, listening to hoofbeats thunder above, to the clash of weapons, to the frustrated shouts of enemies finding nothing. The underground city became an invisible giant, not striking, yet victorious. Sitting in the silence, you realize Cappadocia's defense strategy wasn't only in the stone and traps, but in the mindset of survival. People knew they couldn't face mighty armies head-on. Instead, they chose to vanish, to melt into the earth, existing like ghosts always present, never caught. That invisibility was the deadliest weapon of all. You understand that this strategy didn't just save thousands across centuries. It leaves you with a haunting impression. Here in Cappadocia, stone wasn't only a wall but a weapon. Corridors weren't only paths, but battlefields. Darkness wasn't only for hiding, but for striking back. And even now, after thousands of years, it all still lies, waiting silent, patient as if with one signal. The city would awaken, roll its doors shut, and trap its enemies in the earth once more. You sit on a narrow stone step, running your hand along the wall of Cappadocia. The texture isn't the hardness of granite, nor the fragility of clay. It's volcanic tuff, the product of violent eruptions millions of years ago. When lava cooled and ash settled, it fused into a soft, porous stone that could easily be carved with primitive picks and chisels. But the miracle is this. The more it's exposed to air, the harder it becomes, solidifying into something like natural concrete. This was the foundation that made Cappadocia's underground cities possible and everlasting. Imagine it. If the ancients had lived on granite mountains, they could never have carved kilometers of tunnels with rudimentary iron tools. If they had settled on clay, the structures would have collapsed after just a few rainy seasons. But here in Cappadocia, nature gifted humanity a material both malleable and durable, the core reason such a vast subterranean world could exist. As you walk the corridors, you see tool marks still etched in stone, wavy grooves, fingerprints of time itself. You picture an ancient worker striking the tuff, each chip breaking off as easily as slicing into dry bread. One strike, then another, until a chamber took shape. No explosives, no drills, just patience and muscle. And once the fresh rock met the air, it hardened into sturdy walls. Step by step, nature and humans worked together to create this labyrinth. Nature also gave another gift: insulation and silence. In the blazing summers above the plateau, the underground remained cool, a natural air conditioner. In the snowy winters, the rock held warmth like a blanket. This stability made survival possible for communities hidden for months. No stoves, no brickwork, just ancient stone keeping balance for life. You pause at a ventilation shaft, craning your neck upward. A great column carved through rock. It not only brought fresh air down, but also preserved moisture. Drops of water trickled along its sides, feeding underground cisterns. Without this geology, people could never have lasted so long in the dark. Cappadocia, in a way, was fitted with artificial lungs by nature itself. Even sound was tamed. Tuff's porous structure muffled noise. Above ground, hooves and shouts faded before reaching the depths. Underground, voices and prayers stayed trapped in stone. Thousands could live, cook, and worship unseen by enemies overhead. You think about resilience. Thousands of years have passed, yet these chambers and tunnels still stand. No steel beams, no concrete, no timber braces. Why? Because once hardened, Tuff holds strong, and the builders knew how to carve arches to spread the load. Layer upon layer of volcanic deposits gave natural stability. The people didn't fight against nature, they mastered its rhythm. Few notice another subtle gift: color and grain. Under torchlight the walls glowed soft yellow, neither blinding nor pitch dark. Ash layers created natural striations, guiding ancient diggers where to carve, where to stop. The stone wasn't just material, it was a silent teacher. You pick up a fragment of tuff. It's shockingly light, porous like a dried sponge. Yet packed together, millions of pieces became unyielding walls. You realize this paradox: soft yet strong, light yet enduring, made Cappadocia into a natural fortress. Step back, and the whole plateau looks like a sculptor's gallery. Mushroom-shaped spires, valleys carved by wind and rain, caves etched by time, all born from the same stone. The ancients didn't invent a material. They simply continued the work nature had started. If volcanoes were the artists who set the stage, humans were the artisans who completed the masterpiece. You sigh, realizing that without this unique geology, there would be no Derinkuyu, no Keimakli, no sprawling web of tunnels. Anywhere else, living underground would be madness. Here, it was genius. And that wisdom allowed thousands to survive centuries of wars and storms. In the darkness, you whisper, nature was Cappadocia's co-architect. Not just humans, but volcanoes, ash, and tuff together created this wonder. That is why the underground cities endure, not because humans conquered nature, but because they walked alongside it, carving their survival into the earth itself. You tilt your head upward and see a thin sliver of light slipping through the high stone ceiling. That's no accident. It's a lifeline to the surface, cleverly designed to keep a whole community alive while hiding its existence. These connections were often disguised with care. Sometimes they looked like nothing more than a shallow cave on a hillside. Sometimes they were hidden at the base of a fairy chimney, the mushroom-shaped rock spires Cappadocia is famous for. To an outsider, it was just a hollow in stone. But inside, a narrow tunnel led straight down into the labyrinth, letting residents move in and out unnoticed while enemies never realized a city was breathing beneath their feet. You follow one steep passage, so tight only one person at a time can squeeze through, crouching and bracing with hands. That was intentional. Small openings were easy to hide and hard for invaders to storm. Locals could use them as secret lookout points, listening to footsteps above, then carrying news back to the community. Each passage was like an eye peering up at the world, ensuring the underground city was never blind. Connection to the surface was also vital for trade. Even with stores of food, livestock, and well water, people still needed ties to the villages above. Some exits led directly to markets or fields, where residents could quietly exchange goods, grain for salt, wool for timber, blending into daily life. By day, they were ordinary villagers. At night or in danger, a few steps through hidden doors, and they vanished into the earth. Wells played a double role. Many dropped from the surface all the way to the deepest levels, providing water and communication. From the well's mouth, people could lower bundles, messages, or even just a call echoing down. Wells became vertical bridges between two worlds, conduits not just for water, but for voices. And when danger pressed close, those same connections turned into traps. Locals could roll stones to seal entrances or rig blockades to snare invaders at the threshold. To outsiders, it was a dead end. To the hidden, it was the first line of defense. Standing at one exit, you gaze up at the golden light spilling over the Cappadocian plateau, wind whistling through the narrow slit. And you understand. These connections let the ancients hide without ever severing their bond to the sky, the fields, and daily life. The underground city was never a closed world, it was a living body, its hidden arteries reaching upward, quietly, secretly, but steadily keeping a community alive for thousands of years. You step into a wide chamber deep below, where the light shines on simple crosses carved into the stone walls. Here, the air feels different still, solemn, as if even the rock itself were praying alongside the people. In rooms like these, Cappadocia was not only a refuge for survival, but an underground sanctuary of faith. In the early centuries of Christianity, believers were hunted. Above ground, they faced arrest and death for their faith. But beneath Cappadocia, they found another world hidden from hostile eyes, where they could perform sacraments, read scripture, baptize, and sing hymns. You can almost hear the echo of chants rolling through the narrow halls, rebounding like a declaration. Faith cannot be extinguished. Tiny chapels with rough altars, sometimes even baptismal fonts carved from stone, still remain as proof. Even in darkness, the people of Cappadocia carried spiritual light into the rock. Each cross, etched into the wall, was a proclamation that they chose to live with their faith, even if it meant hiding deep underground to protect it. And not only Christianity before that, perhaps other beliefs had left their mark here too. Some larger chambers may have been spaces for communal rites, or cells for hermits seeking enlightenment far from the world above. Darkness was not just shelter, but a spiritual trial. Whoever dared descend, embracing absolute silence, would feel closer to God. When Arab armies swept through Anatolia, Cappadocia again became a fortress of faith. Christian communities slipped underground, continuing their liturgy even while smoke and fire consumed the land above. Perhaps it was this hidden endurance that kept Christianity alive in Anatolia through centuries of upheaval. Today, as you stand in those underground chapels, the walls are only grey stone, the crosses worn faint. Yet the sacred presence remains. It reminds you that Cappadocia was never just about engineering or defense, it was a symbol of unshakable belief. In the deepest dark, people still turn toward the light, and that is what made the underground cities an essential chapter in the religious history of humankind. You descend deeper, where the air grows thick yet strangely cool. Here, you see wide chambers divided into granaries, wine cellars, livestock pens, all proof that the people weren't just escaping temporarily, but preparing to endure for the long-term underground. You step into a large room where niches carved into the stone walls once held jars. Archaeologists have found traces of stored grain here: barley, wheat, dried beans. You imagine rows of jars sealed with beeswax against dampness. In the stable underground climate, food could last for months, even years. This was the lifeline for a community of tens of thousands. Not far away, you hear the imagined echoes of cows and sheep. The ancients brought their herds down, keeping them in separate pens. In the darkness, the calls of animals and the clatter of bells must have been the familiar soundtrack of daily life. From them came milk, meat, and hides to sustain survival. Their warmth also helped keep the chambers livable through harsh winters. You pass a wine cellar, deep alcoves carved into neat compartments. Cappadocia has long been famous for its wine, and even underground, they never abandoned it. Wine wasn't only for drinking, but for preserving nutrition and for use in religious rites. You can almost smell the rich aroma of grapes mixing with the smoke of cooking fires, softening the oppressive air. Water, too, was carefully secured. Deep wells pierced through layers of rock, tapping underground springs. Thanks to them, the people never feared thirst, even when besieged for months. You shine your light into a shaft, catching the glint of rippling water. That clear, cold flow was Cappadocia's thread of life. Their layout shows a mindset of self-sufficiency. Granaries were set near wells to keep humidity balanced, livestock pens separated to avoid contamination, kitchens placed by smoke vents. Every detail carried intent, as if the underground city was a machine for survival, not just a hiding place. You pause, thinking of tens of thousands living below ground for months. How did they endure? The answer lies in storage and self-supply. Free from complete dependence on the outside, they turned darkness into a storehouse, stone into walls, every chamber into a link in the chain of survival. Today, as you walk through these empty rooms, you still feel echoes of life. The pounding of grain, the sound of milk being drawn, the clink of wine jars, all blending into proof that Cappadocia's people built a model of survival so resilient it defies belief. And that is what allowed the underground cities not just to exist, but to endure as living monuments to human will across thousands of years of history. You climb out of the narrow stone passage of Derinkuyu and step into the sunlight of Cappadocia, where the valleys of mushroom-shaped rock stretch out before you. But in your mind, the underground city still echoes, and you realize that even though no one lives there anymore, Cappadocia continues to shape modern understanding of history, of architecture, and of human survival. Today, archaeologists look at this vast network and say, this isn't just a heritage site, it's a laboratory of history. It proves that people knew how to think systematically, thousands of years ago, calculating ventilation, managing water, allocating living space. It forces us to rethink the idea that ancient people were primitive and only lived by instinct. On the contrary, Cappadocia shows they were engineers, architects, strategists, working in the dark. You read documents on modern urban planning and see that many researchers draw inspiration from Cappadocia. In a world of instability, war, climate change, even nuclear threats, the idea of underground cities has returned. Derinkuyu is mentioned as a prototype. If thousands of years ago communities could live sustainably underground, then why can't we today, with advanced science? Cappadocia becomes a mirror, making humanity think about the future of shelter and survival. Not only in science, but in popular culture, Cappadocia casts a long shadow. The hidden mazes in novels, the secret cities in movies, the underground levels in video games, they all carry its silhouette. When you see a character fleeing through stone corridors, rolling a massive round door to block pursuit, or when you wander a labyrinth below ground in a game, you are walking through Cappadocia's memory, even if you don't know its name. For travelers, Cappadocia is more than hot air balloons. When they descend into the underground city, they enter an experience of perception. They feel small, swallowed by stone. They sense the fatigue and hope of the US, ancients. And in that moment, they carry away a lesson. History isn't only written on battlefields or in palaces, but also underground, where unnamed people patiently endured. You recall the words of a psychologist. The underground city of Cappadocia is a symbol of the human subconscious, where what we hide still exists, quietly sustaining us. It sounds abstract, but it fits. Just as the soul has a dark part we don't see, Cappadocia lies beneath the earth, sustaining generations, then suddenly emerging into the light to remind us darkness is part of life too. In modern consciousness, Cappadocia also reminds us of the endurance of community compared to the fragility of the individual. Above ground, mighty empires have fallen. Hittite, Byzantine, Roman, Arab, but below ground, the underground cities endured because they belong not to kings, but to communities. It's a reminder that what lasts isn't the throne, but collective unity and creativity. You walk through the valleys of Cappadocia, see the shadows of balloons drifting past, see tourists smiling, but in your heart you hear different echoes. The strikes of a nameless worker's pick, the lullabies of a mother in the dark, the prayers whispered in a hidden chapel. And you realize that it is these sounds that have shaped our understanding today, that history isn't only about victories, but about survival, that civilization isn't only temples, but also stone caves, that humanity doesn't only live in the light, but also knows how to find its way in the dark.